Summer of 1995, my good friend Joe died of autoerotic asphyxiation. His parents called it suicide, which I think was a slightly less bitter pill to swallow, but I knew it wasn't. My brother and I were out with him the night before, and he was laughing, he was boisterous, he knew that he was embellishing, he was relishing the summer. He had so much to live for. But it was a crazy summer. Even without Joe, it was a crazy summer. That same summer, I finished grad school and I moved back down to Westfield, New Jersey, where I was going to stay for a short period of time with my parents before moving to the city, and they were not thrilled about having me back at all.
Never are.
Not at all. That was the same summer of '95 that. If you remember any Westfield people, the brood locust invasion. The locusts were swarming out of the ground, flying in the air. You couldn't walk down the street without having them crunch under your feet, get stuck in your teeth. There were locusts everywhere. Entomologists and bug nuts were coming from all over the world to Westfield to study these locusts. That same summer, my parents were building a deck on the back of the house. And they had these two carpenters, Steve and Jim. And my little sister, who was a late addition to the family, she was 6 at the time, had written a song about them that was like Steve and Jim, Jim and Steve. Steve is fat and Jim is crazy. They're building the deck on the back of the house. It's the same summer that I met the woman that I thought I loved and would eventually marry. And it was also the same summer that my parents bought the worst dog in the world. The dog's name was Max. Max would do nothing but bark when he was inside because he wanted to go outside, bark when he was outside because he wanted to come inside, and either way he would bite you. He barked at Steve and Jim, who were building the deck. He bit everybody. He was a horrible, horrible dog. So that's the setup for my brother and I, who had been out with Joe the night before he passed, were preparing for his funeral. And so we're at my parents' house where I'm staying. My parents did not want me there. Come down in the morning. We got our suits on. We're ready for the funeral. Come downstairs to find the entire house, the entire downstairs of the house, the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, were completely covered in shit and puke and diarrhea, and it was all filled with half-digested locust farts. And sitting in the middle of it all is Max, with a note pinned to his collar that said, "Your dog has been eating locusts, Steve and Jim." So my brother famously said, "We don't have time for this." So I grabbed Max. You think we'll clean this up later? Threw Max out into the backyard so he couldn't do. He'd already destroyed the house, but so he couldn't do any more damage. Threw him into the backyard. Went to the funeral. Got home late that night to find that all hell had broken loose. Max had apparently dug his way under the back fence and escaped the yard. My dad went on a search mission, found him a few blocks away, flopping around in the middle of the street, surrounded by police and fire engines and concerned neighbors. He'd been hit by a car. His hip was broken. So, Max was airlifted to some sort of special veterinary hospital somewhere, returned home 3 days later with a pin in his hip and one of those cones to make sure that he wouldn't need the stitches. When I came back a few weeks earlier from grad school, no fanfare whatsoever. Now there's a banner strung across the front of the house from tree to tree. "Welcome home, Max." Right? Yeah. So now, so many years later, My friend Joe is still dead. Nobody knows whatever happened to Steve or Jim. Max eventually got even worse, bit a couple of the grandkids. So my dad, in his own vernacular, took Max for a ride, dropped him off on a farm. But I would like to think that Max is still out there somewhere, even now, biting people and eating locusts. Me, I've now been divorced longer than I've been married, and the locusts will be back in 2030. And I think hopefully 2030 will be as good a year.